She pressed send, and 3,000 jobs vanished in an instant. The flight attendant stood frozen, her face drained of all color as she watched the woman she'd just humiliated calmly tap her phone screen. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The tailored suit, the quiet confidence, the way she'd remained composed even when they threatened to call security. This wasn't just any passenger. This was Dr. Maya Chen, CEO of Chen Global Aviation Consulting, the woman who held the fate of their entire airline in her hands. The woman who, tomorrow morning, would walk into a boardroom and decide whether this airline survived its merger or collapsed entirely. The woman who could end careers with a single recommendation. And they'd just kicked her out of first class. The white passenger who demanded her seat stood there, champagne glass halfway to his lips, finally understanding what he'd done. The other passengers had their phones out, recording everything, the footage already uploading, already going viral. And Maya, the woman they'd treated like she didn't belong, sat there with her finger hovering over her screen, one email away from destroying everything. You won't believe how we got here. You believe what led to this moment. But I'm going to tell you everything, because this story exposes a truth that too many people pretend doesn't exist anymore. Let me take you back to where it all began. Her name was Dr. Maya Chen. Though at this moment, 35,000 feet in the air, the flight crew had no idea who she was. 42 years old, sitting in first-class seat 2A, wearing a tailored navy suit that whispered wealth without shouting it. Everything about Maya spoke of success, of power carefully contained, of someone who'd earned every single thing she had and knew exactly what she was worth. Maya was the CEO of Chen Global Aviation Consulting, a company she'd built from absolutely nothing into a $2 billion empire. $2 billion. Her firm advised major airlines across the globe on everything from operational efficiency to customer service protocols to merger strategies. When airlines needed to know if they should expand or contract, merge or stand alone, survive or sell, they called Maya. Her word could make or break entire corporations. Her recommendations determined whether thousands of employees kept their jobs or joined unemployment lines. But Maya's empire didn't fall from the sky like some gift from the universe. No, her success was built on a foundation of sacrifice and determination that most people couldn't even imagine. She was the daughter of immigrants, people who'd come to America with nothing but hope and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Her father had been a janitor at LAX airport, the very airport she'd just departed from. He spent his nights mopping floors and cleaning the planes that wealthy passengers would board the next morning, without a second thought about who kept them spotless, who scrubbed their footprints away, who made their luxury possible. Maya remembered those nights with painful clarity. She'd been just a little girl, 7 or 8 years old, and sometimes her father would bring her to work when her mother was pulling double shifts at the garment factory downtown. Maya would sit in the terminal doing homework under harsh fluorescent lights, watching people come and go, watching them board planes to destinations that seemed like fantasy worlds to a janitor's daughter. One night, her father had finished cleaning a particularly luxurious first-class cabin. The passengers had left behind champagne glasses and discarded newspapers, crumbs on leather seats that cost more than his monthly salary. He'd cleaned it all, made it perfect, and then he'd done something he wasn't supposed to do. He'd brought little Maya inside. "Sit down, baby girl," he'd told her, his eyes twinkling despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "One day you'll fly in these seats. Not to clean them, to go places, to be someone, to change the world." She'd climbed into that massive leather seat, her small body swallowed by the luxury, her feet dangling above the floor. She'd looked at her father in his janitor's uniform, at his calloused hands, at the pride in his eyes, despite everything the world told him he should feel ashamed of. And she'd made a promise right there, a promise that would shape everything that came after. She would fly in these seats, she would be someone. And more than that, she would make sure people like her father were never invisible again, never treated as less than, never dismissed because of what they looked like or where they came from. That little girl worked her way through college while cleaning offices at night, just like her father had taught her. She survived on 3 hours of sleep and instant ramen, studying accounting and business strategy while her classmates partied and networked with family connections she'd never have. She put herself through business school, graduating at the top of her class, despite the professors who suggested maybe she'd be more comfortable in a different field. Despite the study groups that somehow never had room for one more. Despite the interviews where she could see the surprise in their eyes when she walked through the door. She built her consulting firm in a tiny studio apartment with a used laptop she'd bought off Craigslist and a phone she could barely afford to keep connected. She cold-called airlines for months, pitching her ideas, offering her expertise, being hung up on more times than she could count. But she kept calling, kept pitching, kept believing that eventually someone would listen. And someone did. One small regional airline took a chance on her, implemented her recommendations, and saved $2 million in their first quarter. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. Within 5 years, she was advising major carriers. Within 10, she was the name everyone knew, the expert everyone wanted. Now, she carried her late father's compass with her everywhere she went. It was old, battered, the kind of thing most people would have replaced decades ago, but to Maya it was priceless. Her father had given it to her the day she left for college, his hands shaking as he pressed it into her palm. Always find true north, no matter the storm, he'd told her. No matter how lost you feel, no matter how many people try to spin you around and tell you you're going the wrong way, you find your true north and you head straight toward it. Don't let anyone redirect your path. You know where you're going. That compass sat in her jacket pocket right now, pressing against her ribs like a heartbeat, like a reminder of everything she'd overcome and everything she still had to prove. Maya was on flight 2847 from LAX to New York for one reason: to finalize a merger deal with Apex Airlines worth $500 million. $500 million. This wasn't just another consulting job. This was the deal that would reshape the entire aviation industry, that would determine the future of 3,000 employees, that would set precedents for how airlines operated for the next decade. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, she would walk into Apex's boardroom and deliver her recommendations. Her presentation was loaded on her tablet, her notes were perfected, every detail had been reviewed a dozen times. She'd specifically requested seat 2A, the window seat in the first row of first class. People assumed it was about luxury, about status, about wanting the best seat in the house. But they were wrong. Maya got severe motion sickness, something that had plagued her since childhood, and the physics of the plane meant that first-class window seats experienced the least turbulence. She needed that specific seat to work effectively during the flight, to review her presentation without spending 6 hours nauseated and unable to focus. She had medical documentation. She'd paid for the upgrade. She'd confirmed her reservation 3 times with 3 different agents. LAX Airport, Gate 47, was packed with the usual chaos of a Friday evening cross-country flight. Business travelers hammered away at laptops trying to squeeze in one last email before boarding. Families struggled with carry-ons and excited children. Frequent flyers moved through the security theater with practiced efficiency, shoes already off, laptops already out, the routine so ingrained it was automatic. Maya had arrived early, boarded in the first group, and settled into 2A with relief. Her tablet was already open, her presentation already on screen, her mind already running through the arguments she'd need to make tomorrow. She had 6 hours to review every detail, to prepare for every possible question, to make sure nothing could go wrong. She didn't notice the flight attendant at first, didn't see the woman who was about to change everything. Sarah Mitchell was a 15-year veteran of the airline, a woman who'd seen everything in her years of service. Or so she thought. Sarah was tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was the kind of tiredness that seeps into your bones when you've been grinding for too long with no relief in sight. She'd been struggling with mortgage payments since her divorce 8 months ago, picking up every extra shift she could, smiling through the exhaustion, pretending everything was fine when it absolutely wasn't. Just last month, she'd been passed over for a promotion to lead flight attendant supervisor, a position she desperately needed for the pay increase. The younger candidate got it instead, the blonde woman with 3 years of experience compared to Sarah's 15. But Sarah couldn't afford to be bitter. Couldn't afford to question. Couldn't afford to be anything except perfect, compliant, and available for whatever the airline needed. Then there was Robert Whitmore, and if there was ever a man who embodied entitlement, it was him. Wealthy tech investor, the kind of person who treated first class like his personal kingdom and everyone in it like his subjects. Robert flew this route every single week for business meetings in New York, and he always sat in 2A. It had become his seat in his mind. Not through any official designation, but through sheer repetition and the assumption that his preferences mattered more than anyone else's. He'd probably flown this route 200 times, always in 2A, always with the same routine, the same expectations, the same sense that the world would bend to accommodate him because it always had. Robert boarded late, as he often did, strolling down the jetway with the casual arrogance of someone who knew the plane wouldn't dare leave without him. His suit probably cost $10,000. His carry-on was Italian leather, the kind with a designer name most people couldn't pronounce. His watch alone could have paid Sarah's mortgage for 6 months. Everything about him screamed money, power, and the absolute certainty that he was more important than everyone else in that cabin. He reached row 2 and stopped dead. Someone was in his seat, a woman, a black woman, he noted, his eyes narrowing with annoyance. She was working intently on a tablet, completely focused, clearly settled in and prepared for the flight. Robert's jaw clenched. This was his seat? Who the hell was this person, and why were they in his space? He checked his boarding pass, even though he didn't really need to. Seat 2A. Right there in black and white. There must be some mistake, some error in the system, and it would be corrected immediately because problems always got solved for Robert Whitmore. People moved when he needed them to move. The world rearranged itself to suit his comfort. That's how things worked. Standing near the galley, watching this unfold with a growing sense of dread, was James Park, the junior flight attendant on just his 3rd month on the job. James had taken this position because he genuinely believed in service, in helping people, in making travel better for everyone. He was idealistic in the way only someone new to an industry can be, still believing that doing the right thing mattered more than following the unwritten rules of customer hierarchy. He'd already seen glimpses of how the system really worked, the subtle ways that some passengers were treated better than others, the unspoken calculations of who mattered and who didn't. And he'd seen this particular dynamic before, wealthy white passenger versus woman of color. And it never, ever ended well. Robert cleared his throat, loud and deliberate, the sound cutting through the ambient noise of boarding passengers. The woman didn't look up, still absorbed in whatever she was reviewing on her tablet. He cleared his throat again, louder this time, more insistent, more demanding. "Excuse me," he said, his tone already edged with irritation, already conveying that her presence in that seat was an inconvenience he shouldn't have to tolerate. "I think you're in my seat." Maya looked up from her tablet slowly, her expression carefully neutral, professionally composed. She'd dealt with men like this her entire career. Men who assumed, men who demanded, men who couldn't conceive of a world where she belonged in the same space as they did. "I have seat 2A, she replied calmly, reaching for her boarding pass with steady hands. "See? Right here. Seat 2A. Robert's face flushed, a red creeping up his neck that signaled his rising anger. "Well, I have 2A too," he snapped, thrusting his own boarding pass toward her, as if the physical force of the gesture might make her vanish. "There's obviously been some kind of mistake, and I need this seat. I always sit here. Every week. This is my seat." Sarah had noticed the commotion from where she was helping another passenger stow a bag, and she hurried over, her trained smile already fixed in place, her mind already racing through calculations of how to resolve this quickly, quietly, efficiently. The last thing she needed was a delay, a scene, a problem that would reflect badly on her when she was already on thin ice with management. "Good afternoon," she said with forced brightness, though her eyes betrayed the stress mounting behind them. "Is there a problem here?" Both passengers held out their boarding passes simultaneously. Both showed seat 2A. Both were legitimate, printed by gate agents, scanned at boarding. Sarah's smile faltered as she looked at the identical seat assignments. This was a gate agent error, a double booking, the kind of mistake that should never happen but sometimes did in the chaos of oversold flights and system glitches. And now Sarah had to fix it, had to make a decision, had to choose who stayed and who moved. She looked at Robert first, recognition clicking immediately. She'd served him dozens of times, knew his drink order, knew his routine, knew that he was a platinum elite status holder who spent tens of thousands of dollars with the airline every year. He was a known quantity, a valued customer, someone the airline explicitly told her to prioritize. Then she looked at Maya, really looked at her for the first time. A face she didn't recognize. A woman she assumed, based on nothing more than unconscious bias and the patterns she'd been trained to see, was probably flying first class for the first time. Maybe using miles. Maybe got an upgrade. Definitely not a regular. Definitely not someone whose comfort the airline had told her to prioritize above all else. The decision formed in Sarah's mind before she'd even consciously made it, shaped by exhaustion and fear, and a system that had taught her exactly who mattered and who didn't. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. And by the time she realized it, it would be far too late to take it back. What would you do if you were judged before anyone knew who you really were? Have you ever been in a situation where someone assumed you didn't belong? Drop your answer in the comments below. And listen, if you want to see how this situation absolutely explodes in ways that will leave your jaw on the floor, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, and tell me in the comments section from which country and what time are you watching right now. Because what this flight attendant is about to do will cost her everything. And when the truth comes out about who this passenger really is, the entire plane will erupt. Trust me, you cannot miss what happens next. Sarah stared at the two boarding passes in her hands, both showing seat 2A, both legitimate, both printed by gate agents who should have caught this error before anyone boarded. Her mind raced through the possibilities, the protocols, the consequences of whatever decision she was about to make. The plane was already running late. Her supervisor's voice crackled in her earpiece, asking for a status update, the impatience clear, even through the static. Sarah needed to fix this, and she needed to fix it now. She looked at Robert again, really seeing him. Platinum elite status, weekly flyer, high-value customer. The kind of passenger the airline had explicitly told her to prioritize, the kind whose satisfaction directly impacted her performance reviews, her tips, her already precarious job security. Then she looked at Maya, saw an unfamiliar face, made assumptions based on patterns she'd been trained to recognize, and in that moment, Sarah's exhaustion and fear made the decision for her. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice taking on that particular tone of forced politeness that service workers use when they're about to ask you to accept something unfair, "would you consider moving to seat 4B? It's also first class. Just a few rows back. We'd be happy to accommodate you there." Maya looked up from her tablet, and for just a moment something flickered across her face. Not surprise, because this wasn't surprising. Not confusion, because she understood exactly what was happening. It was something closer to weariness, the bone-deep fatigue that comes from fighting the same battle over and over again, from being questioned in spaces where you absolutely belong, from having to prove your right to exist in rooms that should already have a seat with your name on it. "I appreciate the offer," Maya said, her voice steady and professional, "but I specifically need seat 2A. I have a medical condition, motion sickness, that requires me to sit in this exact position on the aircraft. I have documentation if you need to see it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter from her doctor. Discreet, professional, the kind of documentation she'd learned to carry after years of being challenged, questioned, asked to prove things that other passengers never had to prove. She handed it to Sarah without flourish, without drama, just a simple, "Here's the evidence you apparently need." Sarah barely glanced at the paperwork. Her mind was already made up, already calculating that Robert's status mattered more than Maya's medical needs, that keeping a weekly high-value customer happy was more important than honoring the seat assignment of someone she assumed was probably flying first class for the first time. Maybe on an upgrade, maybe on miles, definitely not someone whose comfort the airline had told her to prioritize above all else. Robert, watching this exchange with growing impatience, stepped closer, his voice rising with indignation. "I fly this route every single week," he said, his tone making it clear that this fact alone should settle the matter. "I always sit in 2A. It's my seat. She can move to 4B. Problem solved." Other passengers were starting to notice now, heads turning, conversations pausing, the universal human instinct to watch conflict unfold. Someone in row 3 pulled out their phone, the camera lens catching the light as they started recording. Then someone else, then another. Within seconds, at least 5 passengers had their phones out, capturing every moment, every word, every facial expression. Maya felt the weight of those cameras, felt the familiar shame of being turned into a spectacle, of having a private humiliation broadcast for public consumption. But she'd been here before, in different spaces, different conflicts, the same underlying dynamic. She'd learned how to navigate this, how to maintain her dignity, even when people were actively trying to strip it away. "I understand there's been an error," Maya said, her voice still calm, still controlled, still professional, even as her heart hammered in her chest. "Perhaps Mr. Whitmore would be comfortable in 4B? It's an excellent seat, and my medical documentation shows I specifically need this window position." Robert's face flushed deeper, that particular shade of red that comes when entitled people are asked to compromise, when the world doesn't immediately bend to their will. "No," he said flatly. "I need to speak to a supervisor. This is ridiculous." And just like that, the situation escalated. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his appearance prompted by Sarah's increasingly frantic radio calls to the flight deck. Captain Davies was in his 50s, a veteran pilot who'd seen countless passenger disputes and had learned that the fastest resolution was usually to ask the person who seemed more reasonable to be the one to compromise. He looked at the situation, made his own instant assessments, based on his own unconscious biases, and made his suggestion. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, his tone suggesting this was simple, easy, no big deal. "If you could just move to seat 4B, we can avoid any further delay. We're already past our pushback time, and we need to get moving." Maya looked at him, and in that moment, you could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Should she fight this? Should she stand her ground? Should she explain, again, about the medical documentation, about her rights as a paying passenger, about the principle of the thing? Or should she just accept it, let it go? Avoid the scene, avoid being labeled as difficult, as problematic, as the angry black woman making a fuss? But before she could respond, the other first-class passengers started weighing in, their voices creating a chorus of opinions, judgments, and barely concealed prejudices. An elderly white woman in row 4, Mrs. Peterson, spoke up, her voice sharp with irritation. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, looking directly at the captain and Sarah, "just let the young lady keep her seat. She was here first, she has medical documentation, and you're making a mountain out of a molehill." But a businessman in row 3 countered, his impatience palpable. "We're going to miss our departure slot," he complained, checking his expensive watch. "Someone just move already. I have a meeting in New York I cannot miss." The cabin had become a courtroom, with Maya as the defendant, her right to exist in that seat suddenly up for debate, subject to a vote by strangers who knew nothing about her, nothing about what she'd endured to get there, nothing about who she really was. Sarah felt the pressure mounting from all sides. Her supervisor's voice in her earpiece was getting more insistent, more threatening. "If this flight delays, it's on you," the voice said. "Fix it. Now. Or you're written up." Sarah thought about her mortgage payment due next week. about her daughter's school expenses, about how close she was to losing everything, and she made a decision that she would regret for the rest of her career. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice harder now, stripped of the pretense of politeness, "I'm gonna have to ask you to move to economy. We'll refund you the difference in fare. But you need to move, now." The words hung in the air like a slap. Economy. Not even 4B anymore. Economy. The implication was clear, brutal, unmistakable. "You don't belong here. Go to the back of the plane where people like you are supposed to sit." Maya's face showed controlled anger, the kind that comes from years of practice at not showing the full depth of what you're feeling, at not giving people the satisfaction of seeing you break. "Economy?" she said, her voice tight. "I paid for first class. I have medical documentation that requires this specific seat. I have every right to be here." Robert, sensing victory, couldn't resist twisting the knife. He smirked, that particular expression of smug satisfaction that comes when privilege is affirmed, when the world operates exactly as you expect it to. "Some people," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, his words calculated for maximum impact, "just don't belong in first class." The phones captured it. Every single one. That sentence, dripping with exactly the kind of prejudice that people pretend doesn't exist anymore. Recorded from multiple angles, ready to be uploaded, shared, viralized. But in that moment, Robert didn't care. He felt righteous, justified, certain that he was in the right. Sarah, exhausted and pressured and terrified for her job, delivered the final blow. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult," she said, her voice carrying the weight of institutional power, of systems designed to protect some people and punish others. "Security will be called if necessary." And there it was. The threat. The implication of violence, of force, of a black woman being physically removed from a seat she'd paid for, from a space she had every right to occupy. Maya understood what that meant, understood the optics, understood the danger. She'd seen the videos, the news stories, the ways these situations could escalate, the ways black bodies were brutalized for the crime of standing their ground. Maya slowly, deliberately began gathering her belongings. Her tablet went into her bag first, the presentation she'd been working on still open, still ready for tomorrow's meeting that would determine the fate of this entire airline. Then her water bottle. Then her phone, her headphones, her father's compass that she touched once, briefly, like a talisman. Like a reminder to find true north even when the storm is trying to blow you off course. James, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, his face a mask of discomfort and shame. He wanted to speak up, wanted to say, "This is wrong, this isn't right, she has documentation, she was here first, this is discrimination." But he didn't. He stood there, silent, complicit, another person who saw injustice and chose his own safety over someone else's dignity. The passengers whispered, their voices creating a low hum of judgment and speculation. "Did you see that? Can you believe this? Is she really being moved to economy?" The phones kept recording, the footage that would later go viral already being captured, already being saved to cloud storage, already beginning its journey to millions of views and thousands of outraged comments. Maya stood, her movements deliberate, controlled, refusing to be rushed, refusing to scurry away like she'd done something wrong. She held her head high, her spine straight, her dignity intact, even as her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Not when they were watching, waiting, hoping to see her break. She walked down the aisle toward economy, each step measured, each breath controlled. As she passed Mrs. Peterson's seat, the elderly woman reached out, touching Maya's arm gently. "I'm so sorry, dear," Mrs. Peterson whispered, her voice thick with shame on behalf of everyone who'd let this happen. "So very sorry." Maya nodded, accepting the apology that should have come from the airline, from the captain, from Sarah, from everyone who'd participated in this humiliation. Then she continued walking, past the divider that separated first class from premium economy, past the passengers who stared with curiosity and pity, all the way to the back of the plane. Behind her, Robert settled into seat 2A with a satisfied sigh, arranging his Italian leather bag in the overhead bin, spreading out his belongings like a conqueror claiming territory. He pressed the call button, and when Sarah appeared, her face still tight with stress, he ordered champagne. The expensive kind. The kind that costs extra even in first class. And make sure it's cold this time, he added, because men like Robert always had to add one more demand, one more assertion of power, one more reminder of who mattered and who didn't. Sarah hurried to get his champagne, her hands shaking slightly as she poured, trying not to think about what she'd just done. Trying not to see the look on Maya's face, trying not to hear Mrs. Peterson's whispered apology that was really an indictment of everyone who'd failed to do the right thing. The plane's door closed. The engines started, and somewhere in seat 32B in economy class, squeezed between a crying baby and a man whose cologne was overwhelming in the confined space, Dr. Maya Chen opened her laptop and began typing an email that would change everything. But nobody knew that yet. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew what power she held. Nobody knew that in less than 24 hours, every single person who'd participated in her humiliation would understand exactly what they'd done, exactly who they'd dismissed, exactly how much it was going to cost them. The plane began to taxi, rolling toward the runway, carrying in its belly the instruments of its own destruction, wound up and ready to detonate. And Maya, sitting in economy with her dignity intact and her resolve hardened, had her finger hovering over the send button, ready to deliver justice in the only language these people seemed to understand. Power. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the woman they'd just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. She was their judge, their jury, and potentially their executioner. And in exactly 18 minutes, everyone on that plane was going to find out. Maya sat in seat 32B, the middle seat in economy, sandwiched between a crying baby whose wails pierced through the cabin noise and a man wearing cologne so strong it made her eyes water. This was as far from the comfortable window seat in first class as you could get, physically and metaphorically. The armrests dug into her sides. The person in front of her had already reclined their seat, leaving her with barely enough room to open her laptop. The baby's mother apologized again, bouncing the inconsolable infant, her own exhaustion visible in every line of her face. "It's okay," Maya said gently, because even in her own humiliation, she recognized someone else's struggle. She'd been that exhausted mother once, flying alone with a screaming child, feeling the judgment of every passenger around her. Maya opened her laptop, the screen casting a blue glow on her face in the dim economy cabin. She needed to work, needed to review her presentation, needed to prepare for tomorrow's meeting that would determine the future of an entire airline. Despite the crying baby, despite the overwhelming cologne, despite the indignity of being forced to sit here when she'd paid for first class and had medical documentation requiring that specific seat, she had a job to do. Then the first email notification popped up on her screen. Reminder: Apex Airlines merger final review, tomorrow 9 a.m. Dr. Chen's final recommendations required for board approval. She dismissed it, opened another file, tried to focus. But then another email arrived, this one from the Apex Airlines board of directors themselves. Dr. Chen, the email read, "We are confirming that your consulting recommendations will be the determining factor in our merger approval process. The board has complete confidence in your evaluation of the airline's operations, customer service protocols, and overall fitness for acquisition. We await your final report." Maya stared at that email for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, she opened another file on her laptop, the one she'd been working on all week. The one that contained her comprehensive evaluation of this exact airline, the one currently carrying her in economy class after humiliating her in front of dozens of witnesses. The file was titled Operational Review, Flight Safety and Service Standards Assessment. And on her screen, visible to anyone who might glance over her shoulder, were notes about this airline's service records, customer satisfaction scores, discrimination complaints, and staff training protocols. She'd been reviewing everything, preparing to make her recommendation about whether this airline was worthy of a $500 million merger, whether it met the standards that Apex required, whether its culture aligned with the values they wanted to bring forward. Maya's fingers moved across the keyboard, adding a new section to her report. Flight 2847, Personal Experience Documentation. Meanwhile, up in first class, Sarah was serving Robert his champagne, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She poured the expensive sparkling wine into the crystal glass, trying to steady her trembling fingers, trying to ignore the voice in her head that kept saying something's wrong. Something's very wrong. You made a terrible mistake. Robert took the glass without even looking at her, his attention already back on his phone, already dismissing her existence now that she'd served her purpose. Sarah turned to walk away. But Monica, another flight attendant she'd worked with for years, grabbed her arm, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like horror. "Sarah," Monica whispered urgently, pulling her toward the galley, away from the passengers. "Did you see the passenger manifest notes? The VIP notations?" Sarah's stomach dropped. "What notes?" she asked, though part of her already knew, already felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Monica pulled out her tablet, the one they used to track passenger information, special requests, VIP statuses. She scrolled to seat 2A, and there it was, in bold red letters that Sarah had somehow missed in her exhaustion and stress. VIP, priority handling required. Seat 2A, Dr. M. Chen, CEO, Chen Global Aviation Consulting. Currently consulting for Apex Airlines merger. Critical. Ensure premium service. Sarah's face drained of all color. The tablet nearly slipped from her hands. Chen Global Aviation. The name echoed in her mind, connecting dots she should have connected hours ago, revealing a truth that made her want to vomit right there in the galley. Chen Global Aviation was the firm evaluating this airline for the merger. Everyone knew about the Apex acquisition, the deal that would determine whether this airline survived or was dismantled for parts, whether 3,000 employees kept their jobs or joined the unemployment line. And the decision, the final recommendation, the thing that would make or break everything, came from one person. Dr. Maya Chen, the woman Sarah had just forced into economy class. The woman she'd threatened with security. The woman whose medical documentation she'd dismissed, whose dignity she'd stripped away, whose rights she'd violated in front of cameras and witnesses and the entire first-class cabin. Monica's voice broke through Sarah's spiraling panic. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that woman you moved to economy, that's the Dr. Chen. She's deciding if 3,000 of us keep our jobs after the merger. She's reviewing our airline right now. She's evaluating our service standards." And you just... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood perfectly. She'd just given Dr. Chen a first-hand experience of exactly the kind of discrimination and poor service that would sink this merger, that would end careers, that would destroy everything. James, the junior flight attendant, had been standing close enough to overhear. His face went from confused to horrified as the realization hit him. He'd watched the whole thing, seen the injustice, wanted to speak up, and he'd done nothing. He'd been complicit in humiliating the one person who held all their futures in her hands. The information spread through the crew like wildfire. The captain received a frantic call from ground staff, their voices sharp with panic. "Why is Dr. Chen sitting in economy?" they demanded. "Why isn't she in first class? What happened up there?" Captain Davies felt his blood pressure spike, felt the full weight of catastrophic error settle on his shoulders. He'd told her to move. He'd suggested she compromise. He'd prioritized the schedule over her rights, convenience over justice, and now he understood exactly what that decision had cost. Back in first class, Robert was oblivious to the panic unfolding around him. He pressed his call button again, impatient, entitled, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. Sarah appeared, her face ashen, her hands still shaking. "This champagne isn't cold enough," Robert complained, holding out his glass like it was a personal insult. "I asked for it cold. Can you people not do anything right?" Sarah took the glass with trembling hands, unable to speak, unable to tell him that champagne temperature was the least of anyone's concerns right now. That they'd all just made a mistake so catastrophic it would echo through their careers for years. Down in economy, Maya was typing. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, adding detailed notes to her evaluation report. "Flight 2847, Service Discrimination Incident," she wrote. Observations. Passenger forcibly removed from paid first-class seat despite medical documentation and legitimate ticket. Staff prioritized perceived customer value over documented medical needs and contractual obligations. Racial bias apparent in decision-making process. White male passenger accommodated. Black female passenger displaced to economy. Recommend full review of passenger treatment protocols and comprehensive staff retraining before merger approval can be considered. She paused, her finger hovering over the keyboard, the weight of what she was about to do settling over her like a cloak. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Every passenger who'd been judged by the color of their skin rather than the validity of their ticket. Every time the system had protected the powerful and punished everyone else. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. The Apex CEO is asking for your preliminary thoughts on the merger. He's nervous. Shall I tell him everything looks good? Maya stared at that message, then looked around the economy cabin. The crying baby had finally fallen asleep against his mother's chest. The man with the cologne was snoring softly. Other passengers were reading, watching movies, existing in their own worlds, unaware that history was being written in seat 32B. Her finger moved toward the send button, toward the email that would go directly to the Apex Airlines Board of Directors, toward the report that would determine the fate of 3,000 jobs. But before she could press it, the cabin erupted in activity. Captain Davies appeared in economy, his face red with embarrassment and panic, his uniform somehow looking disheveled despite being perfectly pressed. He squeezed past passengers, apologizing as he went until he reached row 32. When he saw Maya sitting there, squeezed into a middle seat with her laptop balanced precariously on the tray table, something in his expression crumbled. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice strained with desperation, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please allow us to." Maya looked up at him, her expression cool, controlled, absolutely unreadable. "Captain Davies," she said calmly, as if she were greeting him at a cocktail party, rather than sitting in economy class after being forcibly removed from her paid seat. "I'm quite comfortable here. This has been educational." The captain's face went even redder. "Please," he begged, and there was real fear in his voice now. "We can move you to our premium suite. Complimentary upgrades. Anything you need. Just please, let us make this right." Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him with the kind of analytical gaze she usually reserved for examining spreadsheets and operational data. "What's changed in the last 20 minutes, Captain?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent economy cabin. "The color of my skin? My credentials? Or just your awareness of them?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, like a mirror held up to show exactly what had happened and why. The captain had no answer, because they both knew the truth. Nothing about Maya had changed. The only thing that changed was their knowledge of who she was, what power she held, what consequences their actions would have. Sarah appeared behind the captain, tears streaming down her face, her composure completely shattered. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice breaking, I didn't know. I was just following protocol for resolving conflicts." "Protocol?" Maya's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "Your protocol was to assume the white man belonged in first class and I didn't? Even with identical tickets and my medical documentation?" Sarah was openly crying now, her career flashing before her eyes, her daughter's face appearing in her mind. "I could lose my job," she said desperately. "I have a daughter. I was just trying to prevent a delay. I was under so much pressure." Maya's expression didn't soften. "And what about my job?" she asked. "My dignity? My rights as a paying passenger? Did those factor into your protocol?" Sarah had no answer. There was no answer. She'd made a choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. Then Robert appeared, pushing his way down the aisle, Monica having finally, frantically whispered to him exactly who Maya was. His face showed panic now. All the earlier smugness evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization of what he'd done, who he'd offended, what it might cost him. "Dr. Chen," he started, his voice completely different from the entitled tone he'd used earlier. "I want to apologize. I didn't realize. You can have the seat back. Please. I'll move. I'll go to economy, whatever you need. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and everyone in that cabin held their breath, waiting to see what she would say, what judgment she would deliver. Mr. Whitmore, she said finally, her voice soft but carrying absolute authority, you said some people don't belong in first class. You were right about that. But not about me. Robert's face went from panic to horror as he understood. He was on camera, multiple cameras. His words had been recorded, uploaded, probably already spreading across social media. His company's reputation, his personal brand, everything he'd built was about to be destroyed by his own prejudice, his own assumption, his own entitled belief that he mattered more than someone else. I didn't mean, he stammered, I was just frustrated. You have to understand. Maya cut him off. I understand perfectly, she said. I've understood my entire life. I understand what it means to be judged before anyone knows who you are. I understand what it feels like to be told you don't belong in spaces you've earned the right to occupy. I understand exactly what happened here, Mr. Whitmore. The question is, do you? Robert had no response, no justification, no defense that wouldn't make things worse. Then Maya's phone rang. The ringtone cut through the tense silence, and everyone froze. She looked at the screen. Apex Airlines CEO. The entire economy section had gone completely quiet. Passengers who'd been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. In the galley, Sarah stood frozen, her face streaked with tears. James looked like he might be sick. The captain's career was flashing before his eyes. Maya stood up, graceful even in the cramped space, and moved toward the galley for privacy. Everyone watched her go, their careers hanging in the balance, their futures dependent on whatever she was about to say to the CEO, who was calling for her preliminary recommendation. Sarah, James, and Captain Davies stood like statues, barely breathing. Up in first class, passengers had their phones out, still recording, some already posting to social media. The hashtag first-class discrimination was starting to trend, the video clips spreading across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each share adding another nail in the coffin of everyone who'd participated in Maya's humiliation. Maya stood in the galley, phone to her ear, her back to the watching crowd, her face unreadable. She spoke quietly, her words inaudible to the desperate crew members straining to hear. 30 seconds passed. A minute. 2 minutes. Each second felt like an eternity. When Maya finally ended the call and turned back to face them, her expression gave nothing away. She could have just recommended the merger. She could have just killed it. She could have just ended 3,000 careers with a single conversation. And no one, absolutely no one, knew which it was. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent? What would you do if you had the power to hold people accountable for their prejudice? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're on the edge of your seat right now, wondering what Maya just told that CEO, what's going to happen to Sarah, to Robert, to everyone who participated in this injustice, then you absolutely need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the resolution of this story will restore your faith in justice, and you do not want to miss a single second of what happens next. The moment of truth is coming, and it's going to be absolutely perfect. Maya walked back from the galley, her phone call completed, her decision made. Every eye in that economy cabin was on her. Sarah stood trembling, tears still streaming down her face. James looked like he might collapse. Captain Davies had gone pale, his entire career potentially destroyed by one terrible decision. Robert hovered nearby, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by raw fear about what she might have just told the Apex CEO. Maya stopped in the aisle, standing where everyone could see her, where her words would carry to every person who'd witnessed what had happened, what they'd done, what it had cost. She looked at the captain first, then at Sarah, then at the gathered crew members who'd slowly assembled, drawn by the unfolding drama, by the recognition that something monumental was happening in their aircraft. I built my company on the principle that everyone deserves respect, Maya said, her voice clear and steady, carrying the weight of absolute authority, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Today, your airline failed that test spectacularly. Sarah's crying intensified, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. She knew what was coming. They all knew. 3,000 jobs were about to disappear because of what they'd done, because of assumptions they'd made, because of a system that had taught them to value some people over others. But then Maya continued, and her next words surprised everyone. However, she said, and that single word hung in the air like a lifeline, I also believe in second chances, in learning, in growth. She opened her laptop, turning the screen so they could see the evaluation form she'd been working on, the document that would determine the fate of the merger, the future of the airline, the careers of everyone standing before her. I'm recommending the merger proceed with conditions, Maya said, and you could almost hear the collective exhale, the rush of relief mixed with dread about what those conditions might be. Mandatory bias training for all staff, new passenger rights protocols, and a diversity audit of hiring practices. This airline will change, or this merger will not happen. The choice is yours. She closed the laptop and looked directly at Sarah, who was still crying, still shaking, still terrified. You made a choice under pressure, Maya said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. But you had the power to make a different one. You saw my medical documentation. You saw my legitimate ticket. You knew what was right, and you chose what was easier. Use this moment to be better. The next person who sits in that seat shouldn't have to be a CEO for you to treat them with dignity. They should just have to be human. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, tears flowing harder now, but these were different tears. Not just fear anymore. Shame. Recognition. The beginning of understanding. Maya turned to James, who'd been standing frozen near the galley, his face a mask of guilt and regret. You knew it was wrong, she said to him, and he flinched like she'd struck him. But you said nothing. Silence enables injustice. Silence is complicity. Find your voice, James. Because the next time you see something wrong, that voice might be the only thing standing between someone else and what I experienced today. James nodded, swallowing hard, the lesson landing with the force of a physical blow. He would never forget this moment, never forget the cost of his silence, never forget that doing nothing was still a choice, and choices had consequences. Then Maya turned to Robert, who'd been trying to make himself invisible, trying to disappear into the crowd of onlookers. His earlier confidence completely shattered. Mr. Whitmore, Maya said, and he visibly cringed. Your privilege made you blind. It made you believe that your convenience mattered more than someone else's medical needs, that your routine was more important than someone else's rights, that your comfort justified someone else's humiliation. That's not an excuse. It's a warning. Money can't buy you decency. Status doesn't make you better than anyone else. And the cameras that caught what you said, what you did, those are going to follow you for a very long time. Robert's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. He knew she was right. The footage was already out there, already viral, already defining him in ways he'd never be able to escape. His name was probably already trending alongside words like racist, entitled, discriminatory. His company's PR team was probably already in crisis mode. All because he'd assumed, because he'd demanded, because he'd believed he mattered more. Finally, Maya turned to Captain Davies, who'd been standing silently through all of this, understanding that his turn was coming, that he bore the greatest responsibility of all. Captain, Maya said, culture starts at the top. Your crew followed the culture you allowed to exist, the unwritten rules you permitted, the hierarchy of human worth you never challenged. When you came out of that cockpit and suggested I move to avoid a delay, you told your entire crew that schedules matter more than dignity, that convenience matters more than justice. They were following your lead. The question is, what kind of lead will you provide from here on? Captain Davies nodded, his face etched with shame and determination. He understood. This moment would define the rest of his career, and he had a choice about what that definition would be. The captain insisted, practically begged, that Maya move back to first class for the remainder of the flight. Not because of who she was, he said, but because it was right, because it was her seat, because she'd paid for it and had medical documentation requiring it. Robert had already volunteered, sheepishly, desperately, to take the economy seat, to swap places, to do anything that might begin to repair the damage he'd done. Maya considered refusing. considered staying in economy as a statement, as a reminder, as a living testimony to what had happened. But her motion sickness was real, her medical needs were legitimate, and she still had work to do before tomorrow's meeting. So she gathered her belongings and walked back to first class, back to seat 2A, back to the space she'd rightfully claimed from the beginning. As she settled into the leather seat, finally able to breathe properly, finally able to work without being cramped and overwhelmed, she noticed Mrs. Peterson sitting nearby in her original seat. The elderly white woman caught Maya's eye, and they shared a look of understanding, of recognition, of solidarity across generations and experiences. "I marched in the 60s," Mrs. Peterson said quietly, her voice carrying decades of activism and disappointment and persistent hope. "Thought we'd be further by now." Maya considered this, looking at the woman who'd spoken up when others stayed silent, who'd offered support when it was needed, who'd recognized injustice and called it out even when it would have been easier to look away. "We are further," Maya said finally, "but not far enough, and that's why we can't stop, why we never stop. Because the moment we accept that this is as good as it gets, the moment we stop fighting, we lose everything we've gained and everything we still need to win." Mrs. Peterson nodded, a sad smile on her weathered face. "Keep fighting, dear," she said. "Some of us are too old to lead the charge anymore, but we're still here, still supporting, still believing that one day it'll finally be enough." The flight continued, the tension slowly draining from the cabin, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness, a collective recognition that something significant had happened, that they'd all witnessed or participated in something that would change them, whether they wanted it to or not. Hours later, the plane touched down in New York, the landing smooth and unremarkable, so different from the chaos that had erupted at the beginning of the flight. Maya gathered her belongings, her father's compass secure in her pocket, her presentation ready for tomorrow's meeting, her evaluation complete and sent to the Apex board with all her conditions clearly outlined. She exited the aircraft with dignity, walking past crew members who couldn't meet her eyes, past passengers who'd recorded everything, past the gate agents who were already hearing about what had happened on Flight 2847. A town car waited for her at the curb, sleek and black, ready to take her to her hotel, to give her time to rest before tomorrow's merger meeting that would reshape an industry. As Maya settled into the back seat, she pulled out her phone and saw the notifications exploding across her screen. The video footage from the plane had gone viral. 15 million views and counting. The hashtag tag first-class discrimination was the #1 trend on Twitter. News outlets were already covering it, already reaching out for comment, already spinning it into the story it was always going to become. She scrolled through the headlines. Aviation CEO's discrimination experience sparks industry-wide policy review. Viral video shows CEO kicked out of first class. What happened next will shock you. Major airline faces backlash after discriminating against their own consultant. Apex Airlines had already released a statement, she noticed. They were implementing all of Dr. Chen's recommendations across their entire fleet immediately, not waiting for the merger to finalize, not waiting for mandatory conditions to be enforced. They were acting now, publicly, visibly, making sure everyone knew they took this seriously, that they would do better, that change was coming. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Change was indeed coming. Not because she demanded it from a position of power, but because she'd experienced injustice and refused to let it pass quietly, refused to accept it as just the way things are, refused to be silent about what had happened. The final frame shows Sarah, weeks later, sitting in a classroom. She's enrolled in a diversity and implicit bias training course, the first of many she'll take as part of the airline's new mandatory program. In her hands is a photograph of her daughter, and she's looking at it with determination in her eyes. She's doing this for herself, yes, to keep her job, to repair her career. But she's also doing it for her daughter, to make sure the world her child grows up in is better than the one she's perpetuated. To make sure that when her daughter encounters people who look different, come from different places, have different experiences, she'll see their humanity first, their worth always, their dignity as non-negotiable. Maya's voice comes in one final time, not as narration, but as internal thought, as the philosophy that had guided her through that terrible experience, and every experience like it that had come before. They kicked me out of my seat, because they didn't see my worth. Her voice says, soft but unwavering. But my worth was never defined by their perception. It was built on every obstacle I've overcome, every door I've opened, every voice I've refused to silence. My worth was forged in my father's example, in his calloused hands and his dreams for me, in every night I spent cleaning offices while studying for exams, in every time I was told I didn't belong and I proved them wrong just by existing, by persisting, by succeeding. Change doesn't happen when we accept injustice quietly. It happens when we stand firm, speak truth, and demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who will come after us. For every person who will sit in that seat after me, who will board that plane, who will exist in spaces where people assume they don't belong. We fight for them. We always fight for them. The screen fades to black, and text appears, based on true experiences shared by countless travelers of color. Then another line. This story represents the experiences of thousands who face discrimination while traveling, at work, in public spaces, every single day. And finally, change starts with awareness. Share your story in the comments. Your experience matters. Your voice matters. Together, we create the world we want to live in. Like and subscribe for more stories that matter, stories that challenge us, stories that remind us we're all human and we all deserve dignity. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination? What did you do? Or what do you wish you had done? Share your story below. Your experience could help someone else find the courage to speak up. The video ends, but the conversation it started continues in comments, in shares, in the millions of people who watched and recognized themselves in Maya's experience, in Sarah's mistake, in James's silence, in Robert's blind privilege, in Mrs. Peterson's enduring hope. The story is over, but its impact has only just begun.